One night of humiliation sparked a chain of courage that toppled a $2 billion empire. Sophie Turner was nervous, but excited as she stood outside the tall glass doors of Lamargo, the most luxurious restaurant in the city. She adjusted her simple black uniform, took a deep breath, and told herself this job could change everything. It wasn't just a restaurant job, it was a chance to start over. She needed the money, not for herself, but for her 6-year-old son, Liam. After months of struggling, this job felt like a small miracle. Inside, the restaurant looked like a palace. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with freshly baked bread filled the air. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved quickly, but silently. Everything felt perfect, like a scene from a movie. Sophie tried to keep her hands from shaking as the manager, a tall woman named Clara, showed her around. Clara spoke in a quick, serious tone, explaining rules and routines. Smile, stay calm, and never ever make mistakes in front of VIP guests, she said firmly. Sophie nodded and promised herself she'd do her best. The first few hours went smoothly. Sophie carried plates, poured wine, and wiped tables. She even got a few compliments from customers. Her coworkers seemed nice, though most of them spoke softly, as if scared of being overheard. When she asked one of them, a guy named Ethan, why everyone seemed tense, he just shrugged and whispered, "You'll see. The boss doesn't like mistakes." She thought he meant Clara, but he shook his head slightly. "Not her," he said quietly. "I mean the real boss." Before she could ask more, he walked away. Later that evening, the lights dimmed, the music softened, and whispers spread through the staff. Someone said, "He's here." Everyone straightened their uniforms and stood up a little taller. Sophie didn't understand what the fuss was about until the door opened and a tall man in a gray suit walked in. His presence filled the room instantly. Victor Hell, the CEO of Hale Group, the company that owned Lamargo. People said he was worth billions. His face was cold, his smile thin, and his eyes sharp like glass. Every staff member greeted him nervously, but he barely looked at them. Victor sat at the biggest table in the center, surrounded by important-looking men in suits. The air in the room changed completely. Even customers seemed to whisper quieter. Clara rushed around, making sure everything was perfect. Sophie tried to stay out of the way, focusing on her tasks. But fate had other plans. During the dinner rush, Sophie was carrying a tray with an expensive bottle of wine and 2 glasses for one of the VIP tables. A customer at another table suddenly called her, and as she turned slightly, one glass slipped from the tray. It hit the floor with a sharp crash. The restaurant went silent. Every sound seemed to stop. Sophie's heart pounded as she bent down to pick up the pieces, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Before she could speak, a slow, cold clap echoed through the room. It was Victor Hale. He stood up from his table, his expression unreadable. He walked toward her slowly, each step heavy and deliberate. Everyone froze. Even Clara looked terrified. When Victor stopped in front of Sophie, he smiled, but it wasn't kind. "So," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "this is how my restaurant treats guests. You break glass and think that's acceptable?" I'm sorry, sir," Sophie stammered, her voice shaking. "It was an accident. I'll clean it up right away." Victor tilted his head and laughed softly. "Clean it up? Oh, you will. But let's make sure you never forget this lesson." He looked around the room, enjoying the tension. "You want to work here? Then show us how much you care about this floor you dirtied." Sophie didn't understand what he meant. "Sir," she said softly. He leaned closer, his voice like ice. "Get on your knees and crawl," he said. "Crawl like a dog and clean it." The words hit her like a slap. She froze, unable to believe what she heard. People around her looked horrified, but no one spoke. Victor waited, watching her closely. "Do it," he said again, louder this time. Sophie felt her throat tighten. She could hear whispers, the clicking of phones, someone gasping. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run away. But she needed this job. She needed to pay rent, buy food for her son. So, trembling, She knelt down on the cold marble floor. Her knees hurt instantly. She began picking up the glass pieces, one by one, while Victor stood over her, smirking. "Look at her," he said, turning to his guests. "Maybe next time she'll remember how to behave in my restaurant." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She wanted to disappear, but she kept going, finishing the task silently. When she finally stood up, her hands were shaking, her palms cut slightly from the glass. Victor looked satisfied. "Now, get back to work," he said coldly, turning away as if nothing had happened. The moment he left, the room started buzzing again. But the laughter and music couldn't hide what everyone had seen. Some guests looked away, pretending it hadn't happened. A few waiters avoided her eyes. But one young man quietly slipped a napkin into her hand. Note scribbled on it read, "We got it on video." Her shift felt endless after that. Every second dragged. When she finally clocked out, she couldn't even look at herself in the mirror of the staff restroom. Her reflection looked broken, her face pale, her eyes swollen from holding back tears. She washed her hands, wincing at the tiny cuts, and whispered to herself, "Never again." Outside, the cold night air hit her face as she walked to the bus stop. The city lights blurred through her tears. She thought about quitting, about disappearing. But then she remembered Liam's face, his smile when she told him Mommy got a new job. She couldn't let him see her crushed like this. On the bus ride home, she couldn't stop replaying what happened. The humiliation, the laughter, the way no one stood up for her. She opened her phone. Messages from coworkers were flooding in, some apologizing, some angry, and one brave person had sent her the video. She watched it once. It was worse than she remembered. She saw herself crawling on the floor while the CEO laughed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt something inside her hard, not just anger, but resolve. She saved the video carefully and looked out the window. The city lights passed by, cold and distant, but her heart was burning. She didn't know how yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let this man get away with it. Not after what he did. Not after how he made her feel. He thought she was weak, just another employee he could humiliate. But he had no idea who he had just messed with. By the time the bus reached her stop, Sophie had stopped crying. She walked home quietly, kissed her sleeping son on the forehead, and sat down at the small kitchen table. She opened her phone again, stared at the saved video, and whispered softly to herself, "You'll pay for this." That night, she didn't sleep at all. Something had changed inside her. The man who made her crawl thought the story would end there. But for Sophie Turner, that night was just the beginning. Sophie didn't sleep a single minute that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor Hale's cold smile and heard the laughter echoing in her ears. The humiliation was burned into her memory. She sat at her small kitchen table, the video open on her phone, her reflection visible in the screen. She couldn't believe that was her on the floor, crawling while strangers watched. She felt ashamed, angry, and sick all at once. Her phone kept buzzing. Messages from coworkers poured in. Some said they were sorry for not doing anything. Others told her to stay quiet, warning that the company could sue her if she made trouble. One message stood out. It was from Ethan, the waiter who had slipped her the note. "You didn't deserve that, but be careful. They always find a way to silence people." Silence. That word stayed in Sophie's mind. She had seen fear in everyone's eyes that night. It wasn't just about losing their jobs. It was deeper, like they had all been through something similar before. She realized then that what happened to her wasn't the first time. Victor Hale had probably done this to others. The thought made her hands shake, not from fear, but from anger. Her best friend Mia called early in the morning after seeing the video. "Sophie, this is awful," Mia said, her voice trembling. "You need to post this online. Let people see what he did." Sophie bit her lip. "If I do that, he'll come after me." "He's powerful, Mia. You have no idea who he is." "I don't care who he is," Mia snapped. "He can't just treat people like animals. You can't stay silent forever." Sophie ended the call without answering. She knew Mia was right, but she was scared. She had seen what big companies could do to people who spoke up. They destroyed them quietly with lawyers and lies. She didn't have money or connections. She was just a waitress. But as the morning went on, Sophie's fear slowly started turning into determination. She opened her laptop and typed Victor Hale employees' complaints into the search bar. The results shocked her. There were small posts on old forums, a few mentions on worker website stories about harassment, intimidation, unpaid overtime, and threats. But every time someone mentioned his name, the post would be deleted within days. It was like someone was cleaning the internet to protect him. Sophie kept reading for hours. She found articles about Hale Group, how it owned dozens of luxury brands, hotels, and restaurants. The company was worth billions. Victor Hale was praised in magazines as a visionary businessman and a self-made leader. Seeing those words made Sophie feel sick. How could someone so cruel be admired by the world? She took a deep breath and opened her messages again. One name came to her mind: Dana Fields. A few weeks ago, Dana had been a guest at Lamargo. She was an investigative journalist for a famous online news outlet, and she had given Sophie her card after dinner saying, "If you ever need to talk about what it's like working here, call me." At the time, Sophie didn't think much of it. But now, that small card felt like hope. Her hands trembled as she typed a message. "Hi, this is Sophie Turner from Lamargo. Something happened last night. I think you should see it." A few minutes later, Dana replied, "I remember you. Are you safe?" Sophie hesitated, then sent the video. She waited, her heart beating fast. A few minutes later, Dana sent a message back. "Meet me tomorrow morning at 10. Don't show this to anyone else. And keep your phone on." That night, Sophie barely spoke to Liam. She cooked him dinner, helped him with his homework, and tucked him into bed. But her mind was somewhere else. She looked at him sleeping peacefully and whispered, "Mommy's going to fix this. I promise." The next morning, she took the bus to a small cafe downtown where Dana was waiting. Dana looked serious, her laptop open, her eyes sharp. She shook Sophie's hand firmly. "I watched the video," she said quietly. "It's bad, really bad, and I believe you." Sophie felt a lump in her throat. "He's done it before," she said. "I can feel it." Everyone there was scared of him. Dana nodded. "You're probably right. People like him don't stop after one victim. But if we want to bring him down, we need proof. Real proof. Records, witnesses, patterns of abuse. The video helps, but he'll call it fake or taken out of context. That's what men like him always do." Sophie looked at her nervously. "If I talk, will I lose everything?" Dana's voice softened. "Maybe for a while, but you'll gain something more important. You'll stop him from hurting others." They talked for hours. Sophie told her everything: how the staff feared Victor, how Clara seemed controlled by him, and how employees whispered about past incidents that had never reached the public. Dana took notes, recorded statements, and promised to keep Sophie's identity private until she was ready. When Sophie left the cafe, she felt lighter, but also terrified. What if Victor found out? What if the company came after her? But deep down, she knew it was too late to turn back. She had already taken the first step. Over the next few days, Dana's team began investigating. They contacted former employees, reviewed deleted posts, even spoke to suppliers who had seen Victor's temper firsthand. One man said he quit after being screamed at for spilling coffee on a table. Another woman said she was fired for refusing to attend after-hours meetings with Victor. All their stories fit the same pattern: fear, humiliation, and silence. Meanwhile, inside Lamargo, chaos was brewing. Clara called Sophie one morning, her voice shaking. "Victor knows someone's talking," she whispered. "He's furious. He's threatening to fire the whole staff if he finds out who leaked anything." Sophie's heart raced. "Clara, you saw what he did? Why don't you say something?" "I can't," Clara said softly. "He made me sign things. He has people everywhere. Just be careful, Sophie." Sophie hung up, her hands trembling. She knew Victor's power came from fear, and that fear was what she had to destroy. She turned on her laptop and saw Dana's latest message. "We've confirmed multiple witnesses. Once the story goes live, everything will change. Be ready. That night, Sophie sat on her couch, holding Liam's toy car in her hand. The TV played softly in the background, but her thoughts were miles away. She had started this journey because of one terrible night, but now it had become something bigger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had ever been humiliated, silenced, or broken by people like Victor Hale. The city lights flickered outside her window. She stared at her reflection and saw something different this time. Not the frightened waitress from that night, but a woman who had found her courage. She knew what she had to do next. Tomorrow, the world would see the truth. And Victor Hale, the man who thought no one could touch him, was about to find out what happens when the person you humiliate refuses to stay quiet. The next few days moved like a storm. Sophie woke up each morning with her heart racing, checking her phone first thing to see if Dana had messaged her. She was both scared and curious about what was happening behind the scenes. The world outside seemed normal. People went to work, buses ran, kids played, but Sophie knew something big was building quietly. Something that could shake an empire. Dana and her team were working day and night. They interviewed waiters, cooks, and former managers who had left Lamargo years ago. Some of them were too scared to speak, but others finally broke their silence. They shared stories about Victor Hale's cruelty, how he shouted at staff, threw plates at people, and threatened to ruin their lives if they complained. There were even rumors of women who had been paid to stay quiet after being harassed. Every story added another piece to the puzzle. One night, Sophie met Dana again in a small newsroom filled with glowing computer screens and stacks of papers. The room buzzed with quiet intensity. Dana looked tired but determined. "We've got enough," she said, tapping the table. "The video, the witnesses, the emails, the financial leaks, it's all coming together. When this goes out, he won't be able to hide." Sophie felt her stomach twist. "Are you sure it'll work? He has money, lawyers, everything." Dana smiled faintly. "He has power. But we have truth, and truth travels faster than money when people can see it." Sophie sat quietly, thinking about that. She remembered how Victor had laughed when she was on the floor, how confident he had been, how sure that no one would ever stand up to him. Now, that same arrogance might destroy him. Meanwhile, inside Hale Group's headquarters, things were starting to feel uneasy. Victor Hale still acted confident, but there were whispers in the hallways, strange looks between employees. One of his assistants had told a friend that reporters were calling non-stop, asking questions about staff abuse. Victor brushed it off with a smirk. "Let them talk," he said during a meeting. "No one will believe a crying waitress over me." But he underestimated how fast the internet could turn on someone. Late one Friday night, Dana's article went live. The headline was bold, impossible to ignore. Luxury CEO forces employee to crawl. Former workers reveal a pattern of abuse. Beneath it was the video of Sophie on the restaurant floor. Surrounded by expensive guests and flashing cameras, her humiliation was now proof. There was no way to deny it. Within minutes, the article spread like wildfire. People on social media were furious. The video was shared thousands of times, then millions. Hashtags filled every platform. News channels picked it up, influencers made videos, and even celebrities posted about it, demanding justice for Sophie. Sophie sat on her couch in disbelief as the view count on the video kept climbing. Her hands shook, her heart pounded, but for the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt powerful. The same world that had watched her crawl was now standing beside her. Messages poured in, people thanking her for speaking up, other employees sharing their own stories of abuse. Some said they cried watching the video because it reminded them of their own pain. At Hale Group, chaos exploded. Phones rang nonstop. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Investors panicked. The company's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Victor Hale was furious. He shouted at his PR team, demanding they fix it immediately. "Release a statement," he ordered. "Say it was a misunderstanding. She was cleaning the floor, that's all." They did exactly that, but the response made everything worse. People mocked the statement online, calling it heartless and dishonest. The internet was unforgiving. More videos started, surfacing old clips, hidden recordings, photos of Victor yelling at employees. A few ex-workers went on record confirming that what Sophie said was true. Within 24 hours, the company's stock dropped nearly 20%. Major sponsors started pulling out. Journalists camped outside La Margot, trying to get comments from anyone who worked there. The restaurant shut down for maintenance, but everyone knew the truth. Sophie watched all this unfold quietly. She didn't celebrate. She didn't post anything online. She just sat by her window at night watching the city lights, wondering how one moment of cruelty could destroy such a giant empire. She thought about all the people Victor had hurt and how many had suffered in silence before her. Now, their silence was broken forever. Inside Victor's mansion, he was losing control. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members, lawyers, journalists. His wife refused to appear in public with him. He paced his marble floors, shouting into his phone, threatening lawsuits, but even his lawyers sounded nervous. One of them told him flatly, "It's out of our hands now. The footage is real. The public won't forgive this." For the first time in years, Victor felt something unfamiliar fear. The next morning, TV crews were outside his gates. News anchors discussed him like he was already finished. People dug into his past, uncovering more scandals and lies. One report showed that his company had been hiding serious labor violations. Another revealed that he had bribed inspectors to keep his restaurants open. Every hour brought a new headline, each one worse than the last. Dana's phone rang nonstop as networks asked for interviews. She agreed to a few, but made one thing clear in every broadcast. This story isn't just about one waitress. It's about power and what happens when people stop being afraid of it. Sophie watched one of those interviews with tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe she was the waitress everyone was talking about. The woman who had been humiliated was now the reason a billionaire was crumbling. Still, she didn't feel Joe's strange calmness. She had expected to feel revenge, but instead, she felt relief. People finally saw what he really was. The mask was gone, but not everyone was happy. That night, Sophie received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a man's cold voice said, "You should have stayed quiet." Then the line went dead. For a moment, she froze in fear, but then she smiled slightly. That threat meant only one thing: Victor was scared. The following morning, police cars were seen outside Hale Group's offices. Investigators were seizing documents, computers, and files. The government had officially opened an inquiry into the company's practices. The news reported potential fraud and abuse investigations worth millions. In less than 3 days, Victor Hale went from a powerful CEO to a national disgrace. At home, Sophie received messages from her former coworkers. Many of them thanked her. Some said they cried when they saw the news. "You did what we couldn't," one wrote. "You made him answer for everything." Sophie didn't reply to all of them. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't looking for thanks. She just wanted to breathe again, to feel free of the shame that had haunted her that night. She put Liam to bed and stood by his door for a while, watching him sleep. She thought about how scared she'd been to speak up. But now she realized something powerful. Person's courage can shake the whole world when the truth is on their side. As she turned off the light, her phone buzzed one last time. It was Dana. "It's happening," the message said. "He's finished." Sophie smiled softly and whispered into the quiet room, "Good." Outside, the city kept moving, bright and loud as always. But for Sophie, the world had changed. The man who once made her crawl was finally on his knees. Victor Hale was furious. He had spent years building his empire, and now, in just a few days, it was crumbling. He sat in his massive office, surrounded by expensive furniture, but none of it made him feel powerful anymore. Every phone call, every news alert, every email was another reminder that the world was turning against him. He had underestimated Sophie Turner, single waitress he thought he could humiliate without consequence. The first blow came from his own PR team. They had released a statement calling the incident a misunderstanding, hoping to calm the public. But instead, it fueled more outrage. News anchors tore the statement apart on live television. Social media exploded with ridicule, and countless users shared the video with commentary demanding justice. Victor paced back and forth, shouting into his phone, threatening lawsuits, but even his lawyers hesitated. They knew this was bigger than anything they had faced before. Meanwhile, Dana and her team kept digging. Every day brought new discoveries, emails, hidden recordings, and leaked documents showing years of abuse toward employees. Waiters, cooks, and even high-level managers confirmed Victor's patterns of harassment. They had been silenced by fear, by non-disclosure agreements, and by the company's power. Now, the truth was unstoppable. Sophie watched all of this unfold from her small apartment, amazed and terrified. She wasn't doing anything except letting Dana's team handle it, but every news update made her heart pound. She read stories online of other employees who had come forward, sharing similar experiences. Some had been too scared to speak up before, but seeing Sophie's courage inspired them. One former manager described how Victor screamed at staff for spilling coffee, firing them immediately if they hesitated. Another shared a story of a woman who had been harassed and quietly paid to keep silent. Sophie's stomach twisted with anger. She had been right. This man had been doing this for years. Inside Hale Group headquarters, the chaos was growing. The board of directors held emergency meetings. Investors called demanding answers. Sponsors and partners began pulling out. Hotels refused to host events, and luxury brands associated with Hale Group started publicly distancing themselves. The empire Victor had built over decades was collapsing in a matter of hours. Victor tried to fight back. He gave interviews, calling the video taken out of context and insisting Sophie's account was exaggerated. But the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. More employees came forward, providing written statements and additional videos. The internet wasn't forgiving. Social media posts went viral, hashtags demanding accountability trended, and influential figures publicly criticized him. Every attempt to defend himself made the situation worse. By the third day, investigators from government agencies had arrived at Hale Group. They were seizing financial records, checking for labor violations, and investigating potential fraud. Reports revealed that the company had manipulated employee hours, avoided taxes, and paid hush money to keep victims quiet. The news described the scandal as unprecedented, a billionaire CEO facing accusations that could ruin him. Victor's personal life also started to unravel. His wife refused to be seen with him in public, and old friends distanced themselves. Private jets and luxury cars couldn't protect him anymore. His reputation, once untouchable, was shattered. Each new revelation made him angrier and more desperate, but there was nothing he could do. The public had turned against him, and the law was catching up fast. Meanwhile, Sophie began to feel the weight of what she had started. She had never wanted fame, but her courage had sparked something much larger than herself. People sent her messages thanking her, sharing their own stories of abuse, and offering support. One former employee wrote, "You did what we couldn't. You showed him he's not untouchable." Sophie felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility. She had ignited a movement of truth, and it was only growing stronger. Dana continued to guide her through the chaos. "This is just the beginning," Dana said during one late-night phone call. "We have enough evidence to ensure the company is held accountable. The public will see the real Victor Hale, and he won't recover from this." Sophie nodded silently, understanding the magnitude of what was happening. Victor tried one last desperate move. He attempted to buy silence, offering settlements to key employees and demanding that media outlets retract stories. But the tide had already turned. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. His empire, once valued at over $2 billion, was in freefall. Stocks plunged, contracts were canceled, and franchises began shutting down. He was losing control of everything he had worked for. The final blow came when prosecutors announced formal charges. Victor Hale faced multiple counts of harassment, fraud, and labor law violations. The news described him as a cautionary tale billionaire who thought power and wealth could protect him from justice, only to be brought down by one courageous woman in the truth. She refused to hide. Sophie's life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. She wasn't celebrated like a celebrity. She didn't seek attention. But she knew that what had happened was bigger than her own story. She had stood up not only for herself, but for every employee who had suffered under Victor's cruelty. She began working with advocacy groups, speaking quietly at events, to encourage people to fight against workplace abuse. One evening, Swafi received a message from a former Lamargo employee. It contained a photo of the restaurant boarded up and empty on a note. "Because of you, we can finally breathe." Sophie smiled softly, feeling a sense of closure. She had faced the unimaginable, and now the world had responded. Victor Hale, once a symbol of power and untouchability, had been stripped of everything. His empire lay in ruins, and his influence was gone. Sophie, on the other hand, had found strength she didn't know she had. She had turned humiliation into power, fear into courage, and one terrible night into a story that would be remembered for years. As she tucked her son into bed, Sophie reflected on everything that had happened. She didn't feel hatred anymore, only determination and hope. The man who had tried to destroy her confidence and dignity had underestimated her. Now, the world knew the truth, and justice had been served. Sophie knew she would never crawl for anyone again. She went to bed that night with a calm mind, finally feeling safe. Her courage had changed lives, toppled a billionaire, and brought accountability to a powerful empire. She had taken the first step, and the world had followed. For Sophie, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a life built not on fear, but on dignity, strength, and the knowledge that even one person could make a difference. In the quiet moments before sleep, she whispered softly, "It's over, Victor. You lost. I won." The city outside continued to move, busy and loud, but Sophie felt a quiet peace. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was gone, and in its place, a story of courage and justice had taken root, one that would inspire countless others. For Sophie Turner, the journey wasn't about revenge or fame. It was about standing up, refusing to be silenced, and proving that truth could not be hidden, no matter how powerful the person trying to bury it. And with that knowledge, she finally allowed herself to rest. Knowing the world had witnessed what she had endured, and that justice had been done. Months had passed since the fall of Victor Hale. The news stories, videos, and social media posts had finally slowed, leaving a quieter world. But Sophie Turner's life had changed forever. She no longer woke up each morning with fear or dread. Instead, she felt a steady calm, a sense of strength that came from surviving the storm. The restaurant where she had once been humiliated remained closed, its lights off, its windows boarded up. The empire Victor had built was gone, and the people who had suffered under his cruelty were finally free to speak. Sophie's apartment was small. It felt like home. Liam played quietly in the living room with his toys while Sophie made breakfast. The simple routine felt peaceful compared to the chaos of the past weeks. She had started attending a local college, studying business management on a scholarship offered by an advocacy group that had followed her story. She wanted to learn more, not for power or revenge, but so that she could help prevent situations like hers from happening to others. Even though her life had settled into a quieter rhythm, she still received messages from people across the country. Former employees from Hale Group and other companies wrote to her, thanking her for speaking up. Many shared stories of their own experiences, and Sophie read every word, feeling a mixture of sadness and pride. She realized that her courage had created a ripple effect. One small act of defiance had inspired countless others to stand up for themselves. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a former Lamargo waitress, someone Sophie had never met in person. Inside was a photograph of the restaurant, now empty and silent, with a short note. "Because of you, we finally have our voices. Thank you." Sophie smiled softly, holding the letter close. She had never wanted recognition, never wanted fame, but seeing the impact of her actions warmed her heart. She understood that standing up for herself had helped so many others. Sophie continued to meet with Dana Fields occasionally. They spoke about the case, the aftermath, and the lessons learned. Dana had won awards for the expos, but she never took the credit from Sophie. "You didn't just give me the story," Dana said once. "You gave the world a lesson. Power cannot silence the truth." Sophie nodded quietly, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Victor Hale, on the other hand, was a cautionary tale now. Newspapers reported on the legal consequences he faced, from harassment charges to fraud investigations. His empire, once worth billions, had completely dissolved. Former employees had reclaimed their dignity, lawsuits were underway, and the public had a story to remember for years. For Sophie, Victor's downfall was not about revenge. It was about justice. And seeing it served gave her peace. Life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Sophie continued her studies and focused on raising Liam, teaching him lessons of honesty, courage, and respect. She wanted him to grow up understanding that no one should be afraid to stand up for what is right, and that even the most powerful people could be held accountable sometimes. People recognized her on the street or at the grocery store. They would smile, nod, or even whisper words of admiration. Sophie never sought these reactions. She didn't want to be famous, but she accepted them quietly, understanding that her story had reached far beyond her small apartment and her personal struggles. She had become a symbol of courage, and that was enough. Sophie also started speaking at small events for women's rights and workers' advocacy. She never gave interviews on national television or sought headlines. Instead, she spoke quietly, honestly, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to stand up when faced with injustice. Her words were simple but powerful, and she realized that her story could help prevent others from suffering in silence. One evening, Sophie sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Liam was asleep in the next room, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. She thought about the humiliation she had endured, crawling on the floor of Lamargo, and the anger she had felt. Now, that anger had transformed into strength, determination, and hope. She had turned one terrible night into a story of resilience and courage. Sophie knew her life would never be exactly the same. She carried the memory of that night with her, but it no longer held power over her. She had reclaimed her dignity, and in doing so, she had changed the lives of many others. Every time she thought of the past, she reminded herself that fear only has power if you let it. And she had not let it. In the quiet of her apartment, Sophie received another message. This one was from a journalist covering the final legal proceedings against Victor Hale. They asked if she would like to provide a statement. Sophie typed back a few lines, calm and firm. Justice has been served. I hope others find the courage to speak up, no matter how powerful the person they face may be. She hit send and leaned back, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. Days later, Sophie went to a small coffee shop. She sat quietly, reading a book, when a young woman approached her. "Are you Sophie Turner?" she asked nervously. Sophie nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "Because of you, I finally reported the harassment I was going through at my job. I never thought anyone would listen." Sophie smiled warmly. This small interaction reminded her that her actions had a real impact. Courage, she realized, could inspire even the smallest acts of bravery in others. That night, Sophie tucked Liam into bed and lingered by the doorway. She watched him sleep, remembering how she had promised to protect him, to provide a better life. Now, she felt confident that she had done more than protect him. She had also set an example of strength, honesty, and resilience. She whispered softly, "We're free now, Liam. Free from fear. Free from cruelty." Sophie began to dream of a future where she could continue helping others. Perhaps starting an organization to protect workers or educate young people about standing up for themselves. She realized that her story was no longer just about her. It had become a lesson for the world. She didn't seek fame or wealth. She only wanted to ensure that the courage she had found could reach others in need. Even the city outside seemed quieter now. The chaos surrounding Hale Group had faded into history. But Sophie knew that the story would remain in people's memories for a long time. Victor Hale's name had become a symbol of greed and cruelty, and her actions had shown that even one person could challenge immense power. Sophie spent the next few months building a life full of purpose. She focused on her studies, her son, and small acts of advocacy. She helped people anonymously when she could, sent encouraging messages, and occasionally spoke at workshops. Her life was simple but meaningful, and that simplicity felt like freedom. One evening, as she walked home from the library, Sophie noticed the old Lamargo building from a distance. It was empty, quiet, a ghost of what it had once been. She smiled to herself, remembering the night that had started everything. What had been a place of fear and humiliation had now become a symbol of her courage and resilience that night. Sophie sat by her window looking at the stars. She thought about the journey, the humiliation, the fear, the anger, and the courage that had grown inside her. She realized that life was no longer about being small or invisible. She had learned that standing up, even when it seemed impossible, could change everything. Finally, as she turned off the light and went to bed, Sophie felt complete. She had faced cruelty, exposed the truth, and found her own strength. She knew the world had witnessed her courage, and justice had been served. For Sophie Turner, the journey had ended. Not with revenge or anger, but with peace, hope, and the knowledge that one person could truly make a difference. And as she drifted to sleep, she whispered softly, "It's over. We re-free, and nothing can take that away."